Welcome to Talent Strategy 60. I am your friendly neighborhood talent strategy nerd, Dr. Jim. This is the first time that I've actually got that intro properly. Well, there you go. I just jinxed myself. I just stumbled all over myself. So, anyways, I'm super excited to have another great show. This continues a trend in themes where we are focusing on sales and marketing effectiveness as we look into the end of this year and the beginning of 2023. The topic of this conversation is focused in the area of generating better selling outcomes through buyer-centricity. And we're going to have a wide-ranging conversation in that topic, and looking forward to that discussion. So we'll talk through why that's important and how you actually execute it in your pursuit of getting better results as the year ends, and also as we look forward into 2023. So in order to drive this conversation forward, a couple ground rules before we get to the panelists. We are super excited for those that are joining us on the stream. Make sure you're dropping your comments in the comments section. And we have bandwidth in here to respond to any live questions, detailed or otherwise, that come out of the conversation. So looking forward to a really dynamic discussion on this topic. So with that being said, let's get into the panelist introductions. So I want to start off with Ralph. Ralph, welcome to the show. Why don't you get the listeners and viewers up to speed on your background and experience, and we'll go from there.
Yes, thank you, Jim. My name is Ralph Beltran, founder and owner of Become Your Best Consulting. So a little background about me, a little humor here. I like to say I was born salesperson. Ever since I could remember, I've always loved to be in sales. So started about 15 and a half, and here I am many years later, still doing it. So everything sales, I coach, mentor, I teach sales professionals, basically how to build the confidence, how to learn the skills to be able to go out there and do what we're going to be talking about today. Go out there and prospect, build customer relationships, and overall close sales. So I'm excited for this panel and everyone here speaking, and I hope you all get a lot out of this session.
Thanks for sharing that, Ralph. And I just want to throw a caveat out there. I want to make sure that the viewers and listeners aren't holding anything against Ralph because he's proudly displaying his fandom of the San Francisco 49ers. I'm not exactly down with that fandom, but it is what it is. So, Ralph, glad to have you on and looking forward to hearing, getting your insights, and I'm sure the audience is as well. So, next person I want to get or have bask in the limelight is one of my favorite Canadians, Ryan Paul Gibson. Ryan, welcome to the show. Why don't you tell the viewers and listeners a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Jim. Ryan, I run Content Lift, and I'm what you would call a qualitative customer researcher. So in essence, I just help businesses, B2B businesses, figure out how and why buyers buy. And the reason I want to know that, and I want businesses to know that, because it's my philosophy that if we can understand how they make decisions about things, then our marketing and sales can influence those decisions and eventually lead to a sale. So that's really what I do, and I work with, pretty much Series A to just before Series C companies right now, helping them figure that out with their go-to-market strategy. And I am, as Jim would probably say, the most renowned pickleball reporter known in Canadian history. I took your joke away, didn't I?
You totally did, but that's okay. That's gimmick infringement. But I think on that topic, I think it's worthwhile for you to share a little bit about your previous life before you became an entrepreneur in the customer research space. Give us a little insight into that backstory, because I think it's going to be helpful for the audience.
Yeah, I'll make it quick just for sake of time. So I've been in B2B for about 20 years, and I started off as an operations person and business development person, but moved into marketing and worked for a chain of coffee shops. And that's really where my research journey started, because I couldn't afford it. It was really expensive. So I had to go and do it myself. And I would be as brazen as to go into the stores of competitors and start talking to customers and ask them why they bought here. And then I went through that, and then I took a detour in my career and became a reporter. This is why that joke exists. I've sent Jim one of my stories that he liked. And that's where I really solidified that ability to like investigate what's happening. Like, how do you determine a narrative and like a sequence of events and actions and get to a hypothesis about something? And then I went back into marketing, and I've sort of used that skill set in-house, also as a consultant. And then about a year and a half, about 19 months ago, I moved straight into providing this type of service for companies. I hope that is that sort of what you wanted me to nail down?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
you hit at a couple of things that is going to be pivotal to this conversation. And when we're talking about the concept of buyer centricity, it's really understanding and operationalizing why and how customers buy the way that they do. And there's a disconnect between the broader sales community and the marketing community in terms of how that's applied. And that's one of the things that we want to advance in today's conversation. Last but certainly not least, I want to introduce from across the pond, one of my favorite Scouser fanatics. Scott, welcome to the show. And tell us a little bit about yourself, as well as your misguided fandom on all things soccer or football, as it were.
Yeah, that was one thing I wanted to ask you, Jim. Did you think I was a Liverpool fan? Because that's what I'm getting.
Yeah, I could have sworn we had this conversation before where you had said that that's the team that you pull for. But if I'm mistaken,
No, it is.
I'm not.
I wasn't sure if you thought I was a Scouser fan because I'm a Scouser, or if I'm just a bit of a Glory supporter, right? Because obviously they've been winning Europe and the Premier League. But no, they are my team. But I'm not from Liverpool, just for the record.
Yeah, I was referencing that because of the fandom, not the actual place of origin.
Yeah, no, just to clarify. So yeah, but yeah, just to give we'll give everyone on this, every viewer, a bit of background. So I, like my two fellow panelists, I've worked in sales, B2B sales, for 22 odd years. So kind of giving away a bit of my age there. But it's it's been a long journey. I'm also a professionally trained actor. So one of my really obsessive parts of my sales training is about the psychology of selling. And also within that, obviously, it's the psychology of buying as well. So I'm just fascinated by how people communicate. I never really think of sales as sales. I think of it more as the art of communication. So that's the sort of angle I come from. And I just think it's beyond all possibility what you can achieve if you become a very skilled communicator. And that's exactly what I train. So I founded my company Sales Squared. We're a coaching consulting company, and we work with B2B companies within SaaS, within cybersecurity, within maybe 5 or 6 different industry sectors. And so we train salespeople to become much more adept in their communication skills, and we look to improve things like business acumen and how you communicate effectively to secure your sales. So that's pretty much my backdrop.
No, that's great stuff, Scott, and I appreciate you sharing that. And I know that we have a lot of common ground as far as philosophically how we align from a sales and marketing perspective. Yeah. But I think we just uncovered another area where we might be in alignment. Victor Castro from one of the folks in my network just typed in the chat, "Go Man United," and I think you and I are aligned very tightly in our distaste for Manchester United. So this just a news flash for anybody that is watching on the stream. This is not an English Premier League conversation or an NFL conversation, or actually it's not a pickleball conversation either. So this is not a sports oriented conversation, but sometimes it will go that direction. So let's set the stage here, and I think I think for those that tuned in last week, one of the things that I pointed out in last week's conversation, along with the panelists, is the fact that when you look at sales as a function and sales professionals in general, in terms of quota attainment and retention and turnover, there are some serious problems. You're looking at the back end of 2022, and I think the data shows somewhere in the neighborhood of 70% of sales professionals are not going to make quota this year. And you compare that with just overall retention and turnover that exists within the sales function, that typically tends to be in that 30% range. So you're talking about pretty big enterprise level problems that exist across many organizations. And part of the intent in this conversation was to help pave a different way, pave a new way forward for salespeople to be more effective, for quota to be more easily attained by doing different things versus what's been, status quo for the last number of years, and also engage the world in a way that doesn't create this built-in resistance from the people that you're trying to sell to. So that's a tall order, and we're not going to solve all of that in this conversation, but I wanted to throw those couple of points out and give an opportunity for the panel to respond. And I'm going to lead it off with Ralph. Ralph, when you look at the issues of turnover within sales and also quota attainment within sales, what do you attribute those trends to? What's your take on why those things are happening?
Yeah, I would say the number one thing and the most common would be the type of training that they're providing sales reps. Most of the training is on product and service, company orientation, on a little bit about the company, what we do, what we're about. And this is every organization from small to medium sized business to enterprise, where the training starts off with, this is what our company does, this is what we're about, this how long we've been here. So they pump you up about the company, and then they start talking about deep diving into, this is what we offer, the product and the service. Very, very little training on regards to how to find your ICP, your ideal customer, how to find the right customers, how to have conversations with customers. So it's strictly based on the product and service area, where they're just showing you videos and this is how our product works, this is what it does. Not aiming on, okay, how are you going to find the customer? What type of customers are you looking for? So the training itself, the initial training, the onboarding training that's put out there, the 30, 60, 90-day ramp training that I see is all product service based training, a lot of it.
So you just said three big things that has got me fired up. You mentioned product focused, service focused, and then you start throwing out marketing terms like ICP, and that gets me. And just for those who are watching, that's not Insane Clown Posse. So I just want to make sure that is out there as well. When we're talking about ICP, it's ideal customer profile, and with those three concepts that you laid out, I think it's important to get the marketer on the show to chime in on why that's relevant. Ralph, you cited training and how training is delivered and the topics that training covers. I want to get Ryan's take on, okay, if we're overly product focused, if we're overly service focused, what does that miss in the context of buyer centricity? What does that miss in terms of how you engage in the world as a seller, and how can that be shifted?
Well, the short answer is because most people aren't ready to buy, right? I'm not the only one that says this. McKinsey, Gartner, name whatever giant research firm you want to pull out of thin air, and they'll have literature around the same thing. And even I think more to the point is the amount of time that a buyer spends with a vendor now is much less than it was 10 years ago. It's flipped. When I started in B2B, the vendor was your source. Like, you needed to go to them for all sorts of things, right? Not just information around products, but like how are your other clients doing this, right? That's a Google search now, right? So it's very much changed. So if you, just for me, Jim, and my fellow panelists, like when you look at the nature of how a sales deal unfolds, it's mostly high intent, right? And they're walking through the nuances of the product, budget, all the band stuff that we've heard about for years, if that's sort of the process you follow. But what happens if you get someone that is not as high intent, they're not in that stage where they're ready to buy? Then if you don't understand their business model, who that person is, the things they care about, giving them information about how they can help their business, and you're just focused solely on, here's our widget, here's how much it costs, you're going to lose a lot in that ability to influence their affinity towards your product, right? So I look at it as, one, the buyers aren't ready, And two, marketing teams probably are not doing a great job of helping the sales team out when it comes to these types of things, right? Because a lot of that, the marketing team can really help enable sales there to push things over the finish line.
You know, I really love what you said, Ryan, on intent. And I think what I took away from what you said is that sellers often mistake any signal as an intent signal. Oh, somebody went on our website, they're ready to buy. Oh, somebody downloaded an ebook, they're ready to buy. Scott, I'd like you to kind of respond to anything that's been said already, but I think there's an opportunity to reframe how you look at intent and what actually is actual intent versus perceived intent, and how that should inform how sellers behave in the world. So feel free to chime in on anything that's been covered so far. We've covered a lot of ground already.
Yeah, no, the intent piece is a really interesting one, but just to set the context for what my kind of outlook is on that, I'm of the belief that the reason so many salespeople are now missing quota is because for me, it's because there is a lack of interpersonal skills, and that's because lots of salespeople are now hiding behind tech stacks. They're not, using the phone. They're not talking to people. The quickest and the most effective way of understanding, first of all, is someone relevant is just to pick up the phone, to have a conversation, and to disqualify, ruthlessly disqualify. So to bring that onto the piece on intent. So if you have a salesperson who, say, they have a website inquiry, they go into that particular lead, they have happy ears, right? So they go into it, they think, okay, this individual is halfway towards buying, so I'm just going to ask maybe a few surface level questions, and they're going to say yes, and then they'll start to product pitch. This is a huge error, because what's happening is they're doing the opposite of what they should be doing, which is ruthless disqualification. They need to be going into that conversation to think, why will this person not buy? They need to be pulling out objections before the buyer even mentions them, because they need to have high quality leads who are in that zone of actually maybe making a purchase. So I think, there's a few parts to this, but the main takeaways for me on this particular bit is disqualify, and look for all the reasons that your buyer may not be relevant. This is how you stem any kind of happy ear scenarios, which is what I believe to be one of the big reasons so many people are missing target these days.
And I'm going to open this comment up, and that's a great observation on your part, Scott. You're again preaching to the choir when it comes to ruthless disqualification. But I think what I want to do is expand on that a little bit before we get into why and how customers buy. Why is it important for sellers to be more focused on the disqualification criteria than the qualification criteria? I want to open that question up to Ryan first, because Scott, you just introduced that topic, and I want you to have the final word on it. But Ryan, why would I argue? Why does it make sense to argue that disqualification criteria is much more important than qualification criteria?
For me, because there's only so much time. Like, every business is about managing and de-risking your resources, right? So how do you best do that? And you do that by understanding who you should be investing your resources into. That's sort of a high level answer, but I mean, if I have 6 conversations a day, and this is use Scott's example, and I'm not ruthlessly disqualifying, and then that takes up most of like my dials and my time, then I've just wasted the time of the day, right? Not talking to people that don't make sense for the business. So I think I'd rather spend the time on people that will make sense as a customer for me, will have a longer lifetime value, will fit the business model, who I can expand revenue services into. They have to make sense for the business. So if I'm just talking to anyone that comes along, I'm not effectively using my time. So that's why, to that question, I think that's the low hanging fruit for that. But I'll let my sales colleagues maybe answer, from a sales perspective.
I mean, I think, Ryan, what you mentioned, it's the application of the Pareto principle. 80% of your revenue is going to come from 20% of your customer landscape. So if you're just simply looking to maximize your effort across the ideal prospect, that makes sense that way. But there's another element of disqualification criteria that sellers need to, you Ryan, you referenced the phrase de-risk, and I want to hand it off to Ralph. When you're talking to anybody and everybody, what's the risk that you run as a seller in terms of how that buyer is going to, I guess, pigeonhole you as a seller? If you're talking to everybody and you're getting the happy ears, as Scott mentioned, what can happen from the buyer side that is not ideal from the seller side?
Yeah, well, we'll be talking about time. Time, as a sales professional, time's one of the most valuable assets we have, right? We have to prospect, we have cold calling. There's so many things that you do as a sales professional that take up your time, whether it's appointments, you're driving out there, so you're out in the field a lot. So what you got to do is you need to make sure the thing is you got to make sure you're talking to the right decision maker. That's the key there. Are you the person that will be making the decision? Is there anybody else that we need involved in this? So the first thing to disqualify is make sure you're talking to the right person. You don't want to be, talking to somebody trying to qualify them if they ain't even the right person. So the basic question would be, are you the right person to be talking to in regards to this decision? Is there anybody else needed involved? So that way you have the right people in place that need to be there at that time. That's the main thing. The second thing is just asking a lot of these open-ended questions to make sure that this is a prospect that's even worth you having your time there to talk to them and engage with them. Are they even a customer of yours? Are they even in the market to buy? So there's a lot of disqualifying questions that you need to ask to make sure that you're even going to spend your time in the right place with the right person. And that's through qualifying questions, having your own qualifying questions. Is this my ideal customer? Is this the person I need to work with? And going off of that, you make it quick. You ask those questions. The ones that fall in that pool, you continue the conversation. If they don't, then you easily want to walk away and say, you know what, I don't really think that this product service is for you. Don't be afraid as a salesperson to walk away if that's not your customer profile.
I like what you said, Ralph, on, hey, are you dealing with the right person? I think from my perspective, I'd probably apply a little bit of nuance to that, because one of the things that I often do, like my greatest source of intel in a complex sale is at the user level. So I'm okay having a certain level of conversation with somebody at the user level, and I usually tee that up as a springboard to a broader conversation with someone that's in my active persona that I'm targeting. So I might float the idea of, hey, I think there's an opportunity here for us to help you. Who would feel left out of this conversation if we were to move forward, and ask for an intro that way? And by using that little bit of nuance, I'm probably not hurting somebody's feelings by saying, oh, well, you're not the person I need to talk to. But I think the general principle of what you said, Ralph, makes a lot of sense. I want to wrap this thread up by handing it off back to Scott, who was the one that opened the door on the conversation of disqualification criteria. If you're talking to everybody and you're not disqualifying effectively, what do you risk as a seller? I mean, we've already talked about time. We've already talked about resources. What else should we be considering that we need to have on our radar to be more effective with our time management and also our disqualification criteria?
Yeah, that's I think, just to pick up on your point there, Ralph, questioning is so critical, because I think a lot of salespeople will go into their pitch, for want of a better word, and they will do that so quickly. And I think that to me, that indicates that they have quite low EQ skills, because they're hearing the odd signal, right? Like, oh yeah, well, we have problem X. And then they're not controlling their impulse to go into sell mode. By going into sell mode very quickly, they build the zone of resistance in their buyer will skyrocket, and they will just be so turned off, because you just sound like you just want to sell, right? You just want to do a deal, make commission. So I think the question, when you're disqualifying, you need to ask very good questions, and you need to dig into their answers very specifically so that you can start to uncover exactly what their problems are. And you don't accept anything at face value. You dig in, and you keep on digging until you have revealed the depth of their problem. And if you or one part of your solution can actually try to stem that problem within their organization. So I think lots of salespeople will think they're disqualifying effectively just by asking one or two basic questions. But oftentimes I think they're missing a big trick. And because they're not exploring that buyer's particular situation, every buyer has a very specific situation, they are missing out on many potential opportunities because they just think, okay, you don't have problem X, you have problem Y, you don't have this, but they're not exploring, they're not curious, they're not going on a journey, they're just going quite black and white on the situation. They're not exploring shades of gray, right? And that's where I think a lot of opportunities are being completely falling through the cracks. So that's my kind of take on that.
No, that's great insight, and I think it's a great segue to opening up the discussion to the topic of how and why customers buy. I think if we're I think we can all agree that the critical thing that sellers need to do more effectively is really get a deep understanding of the customer problem. And that sounds simple enough, but the roadblock is, well, how do you figure that out? I mean, obviously you can ask, but if I don't know you and you're reaching out to me and asking me, hey, can you tell me about your problem? I'm gonna be like, who the hell are you? I don't want to talk to you. So let's set the stage of how you can effectively uncover, that understanding of the problem, the process that the customer goes through, and the journey. And I want to hand that off to Ryan and have him give us a little bit of insight in how you uncover that. And then we'll transition into talking about, okay, now that we know this is what the process looks like, how do we actually leverage that to have more constructive conversations? So Ryan, floor is yours.
Oh, well, I'll talk about how I do it, right? And I follow a bit of a methodology which is called jobs to be done. And if people aren't familiar with that, feel free to Google it. Jim can maybe drop some stuff in later. But it's really just a framework around innovation and how and why people buy things, and sort of a methodology for uncovering that. What I try to, my big pillar is customer interviews. That's really what I focus on. And in a sort of sales setting, it's a research setting. What I'm trying to understand is, how do they buy and why do they buy solutions like ours or similar to ours? Because even when you think about the number of solutions, look, just take SaaS, because that's really where I work a lot in. I mean, there's estimates 200,000 different SaaS solutions on the planet right now. How do they know to choose you? Or how do you know how to have those conversations when you are qualifying or ruthlessly disqualifying, to ensure that they don't see you as something that you're not, right? So you have to understand so I map out that process of how they go from a first thought around, oh, this problem sucks, this thing's going to be an issue, we should probably spend money to fix this thing. And then what is the actual chain of events that they take from that first thought all the way to a closed one? What are they doing? What are the behaviors they're taking on? What do they care about? What matters to them? How do they evaluate things at both sort of as they build a consideration set, and then when they actually reach out to do a bit more due diligence around who they might choose? Those are the things that I care about. And we map all those decisions out, so then we can understand, okay, what stage, if we understand what intent they are at which stage, how can we influence that decision through sales and marketing? That's, I think, the best form for figuring out that type of process. There's still other things, secondary form of research. You can Google some things, research papers and so on. But for me, that is really the ideal and the crux of how you do it. I hope that answered the question, Jim.
No, I think it does, and I want to restate some of the key things that I drew out of that conversation. So if I'm understanding what you're describing, your recommendation is, if you want to, quote unquote, build a playbook for understanding how your customers actually made the decision to partner with you, you need to have an interview process in place. You need to be able to, question them or create inquiry to find out what were the trigger events that happened before they went to market. What were the factors that drove them to pick you as a solution, and map all of that stuff out there. I'm oversimplifying it. So if I'm gathering that correctly, and Ryan, am I tracking with what you're describing?
Absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
yeah. And if I may, just give an example, like in some of the work I've done around this, it's been very apparent how our sales and marketing does not align to how they buy things. I've done that work where, we might have different segments of buyers, some at the lower end for like a smaller contract value and a higher contract value. And then when we map out like what they care about at each stage, and then we overlay that over our marketing and sales motions, nothing's matching. So how in the world are we going to attract and then convert these ideal clients that we want to go after if nothing speaks to them? Right. So those
Yep.
are the things. That's what I care about, because then that's when you start to build a database and an asset or an asset set that you can use and leverage in your marketing and sales to start actually building awareness, getting people into a pipeline, filling a quota.
I mean, that what you just mentioned there, taking that foundational step of interviewing your customers, maybe even immediately after they buy from you, to map that process out, that has implication on both your direct selling side and your customer success side and your marketing side, because you're basically getting a Rosetta Stone on, okay, here's what happens. Now what do this is what I should be doing when I go to market. So let's pick that thread up a little bit. So once you've got a roadmap, which is basically what Ryan is describing, when you're looking at sales outreach, whether you're talking about email or phone or whatever else you decide to do, how should that roadmap inform the type of outreach that you're doing? So I want to pose that question to Scott. And have him take the ball and run with it. Once you have a roadmap of what triggered a customer to buy from you, how should that prompt you to engage your prospects? And Scott, you're on mute.
Yeah. So thank you, Jim. What I would say is that, completely with you on this, Ryan. It's sales and marketing is so disjointed in so many companies that it's just scary. You just think, how is that possible? If they're not communicating, if they're not in sync, how can you possibly maximize the work of the marketing team to tee up the sales team to maximize their effectiveness, right? So what I would say is that if you have a well-oiled machine, and if sales is talking to marketing as it should be, and it's a very transparent, it's almost an integral part. Each department relies so much on the other one. So the outreach should consist of all of the main problems identified within your ICP. It should consist of the potential implications of those problems in a wider sense. So whether that's specific to the company, it may be macro-led. And you also have to understand how your particular solutions fit into that picture. But you can't lead with that. You have to lead with business problems and ramifications of those problems. So everything you do and everything you say in your outreach has to connect very specifically to those issues. Very simple.
That's great stuff. And I'm going to put you on the spot, Scott. Let's make that real. So pick whatever problem that might exist. Reach out to me as if I'm potentially somebody that's dealing with that problem. What would that look like from an outreach perspective if you're calling me on the phone?
So what I would say, hi there, Jim. So I'm Scott. I'm calling from XYZ. So I typically work with managing directors in Industry X who struggle with these three issues: issue X, issue Y, issue Z. And I'm going to take a long shot and think that none of that applies to you. Would that be right? But that's obviously a negative reverse, right? And they will then say, actually, yes, very funny, but problem X applies to us. Oh, okay. Could you just tell me a little bit more about that, Jim? Because, there's a general sense of how this problem manifests itself, but what does that mean to your business?
That's so you did something that I really like in that, and I'm gonna transition over to Ralph on it, but I want to call something out. So I would probably in my outreach only pick one item, but what I liked about what you did was that there was a pattern interrupt that was just built in, which was I'm assuming you're not dealing with any of that. Most sellers, when they go to market, automatically assume, hey, I've noticed on your profile X, Y, and Z. Typically, when I talk to people like you, you're dealing with this problem. Is that what's going on? And that's, you know, conditioning. I like the reversal on it. So I think that's a good execution of that playbook. So
See,
great
that's the
stuff.
thing. What I find, Jim, is that I mean, this is the psychology, right? People don't like to be told what they should think or feel or believe. They like to tell you that you're wrong. So if you say none of that applies in your world, they say no, it does actually. So they're pushing back. That's the psychology of it, and it's, you know, it works because it is a pattern interrupt.
Yeah, so that's one way to execute that playbook that Ryan is building from an outbound call perspective.
Yeah.
How can we apply that from an outbound email perspective? And I want to hand off to Ralph to take that. What are some of the things that you've seen work really well when you know what's typical in terms of the problems that a customer is dealing with?
Yeah, so it would be tailored to something that you did some research on. So anytime that you're going to do any type of outbound research, or I mean outreach, you're going to have to do a lot of research on it. Try to figure out, what type of angle you're going to come about. What's the company doing? What's the company experience at this time? Are they growing? Are they downsizing? Because this is going to be a lot of what your conversation is going to be gauged around. Is, what are they going through as a company? That way you could come in with something interesting to them as far as what you see. For instance, if the company is a SaaS company and you see that on LinkedIn that they have added 20 new salespeople, that's something that you want to have them be proud of. Oh, I see you're growing. You hired 20 new salespeople in the last 6 months. That's excellent. That means you're doing a lot more onboarding, a lot more training. But as we all know, 70% of sales reps are missing quota right now. There's a very small percentage. Is this something that you would be experiencing within your company? So once again, that's kind of how I would go about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the threads that I want to tie together in all of this is the fact that if you're talking about buyer centricity and driving better outcomes from a sales effectiveness perspective, you need to be obsessed about the customer problem, whatever that might be, and you can bring on somebody like Ryan to go ahead and do the customer research and map that out for you. If you have a more mature selling organization or revenue organization, this could be something that your account management team should be constantly engaging the existing customer base on. Hey, what happened here? What was relevant about this? How did that impact you? And then that's building out your playbook that should inform what your outbound looks like. So great stuff, great insights by the three of you. So I appreciate you all sharing that. So let's move a little bit down funnel. So we talked about, hey, here are some ways that we can leverage a playbook from an outreach perspective. But there's another important component that I want to talk about, and this is where you move further down funnel. So we've been at the top of the funnel right now, but as you've developed some opportunities, salespeople often get stuck in, hey, just wanted to follow up and see where we're at and moving this thing forward from point A to point B. There's only so many of those conversations that you can have. So I want to tie this back to Ryan's playbook. If you've mapped out how and why and what's happening, what are some of the ways that you can leverage that intelligence to keep the relationship moving from an opportunity perspective without having a constant, commission-oriented, deal-oriented conversation? So hopefully I'm asking that question the right way. I want to open it with Ryan on that question, and I want you to apply it from a marketer's perspective. If you have the roadmap, you have open opportunities, how can you have a different sort of conversation that keeps you in that discovery mode and keeps the momentum going without having you seem like a commission-hungry pusher?
Well, you have to remember, you're not the only priority in the business, in the customer's business, right? There's other things they're doing. And when I do a research exercise, like, I'm not just figuring out the trigger and the pains of necessarily how they got to this solution. I'm also figuring out adjacent problems. I'm figuring out like things they wanted to achieve and maybe didn't get to. I'm seeing the trends in their business, other, other goals they're trying to accomplish, other trends they should be aware of, if we're doing our own due diligence. So I think the intel you can use is, what are the other problems they're trying to solve? What are things they should be aware of as the market is shifting around them? What are our other customers doing and finding success in similar ways they're trying to achieve things? As an account manager, I usually hear these things, right? We're working on this too, and working on this too, and we thought of you because of this thing, right? All these things often interconnect. So I think you have to realize that it's not, when you're gathering intelligence, it's not necessarily just about the solution you're selling. It's about everything that's mapped around it. And I've done that with clients where I did a research project, Jim. It was January. We found 27 different topics of conversation that were either directly related to or adjacent to the service. 20, not just like a blog post or a piece of content, discussions you can have in all your various channels over a fiscal year, right? So those are and you can send email and social and all those things. So those are ways you can, because you can still give people, the things they need. And just to contextualize it, when I was a B2B buyer 20 years ago, my account manager would send me intelligence via email. Hey, did you need this? Hey, I just saw this. I saw this, saw to you. We can do those same things today. We just even have more tools and more data to give them if we can map out all the pains and problems they have.
So there's some really interesting nuggets that you just mentioned there, and I'm going to go to Ralph in a second, but I want to provide some context. Shocker, I'm providing context. So one of the things that you mentioned, Ryan, is, and I think this is an important thing to call out. You as the seller aren't the only thing that they're worrying about. That's not the only priority that they're dealing with. And that creates an interesting opportunity for a seller to continue to advance the opportunity downstream in a really interesting way. And I'm going to give credit to Leslie Vanetz, who posted about this recently. And if you aren't following Leslie, you should. She's the founder of Sales Team Builder. But one of the things that she said from a mindset perspective is that in every engagement that she has, whether it's on the buyer side or on the seller side, she's got three objectives, or one of three objectives. She either wants to help, earn, or learn. So when you're engaging with your customers, and I'm going to pose this question to you, Ralph, why is it important to have that mindset that Leslie talked about when you're engaging with your customer and trying to move the relationship forward? And keep in mind, I said relationship, not opportunity. So how do you operationalize help, learn, and earn as part of your motion in moving the opportunity forward?
Yeah, so it all starts off with building that customer relationship, that rapport. Asking these questions to get to know them on a personal basis. In sales, I always believe that you got to build that relationship first. You got to build that rapport. Once you start doing that, you could start asking questions where the prospect customer will start opening up to you more on the friendly basis. Well, this is what I'm experiencing. This is what I'm exactly going through at this time. This is what you want to draw out. You want to draw out that deep emotional feeling that the customer is going through to understand them. So when you're at that point, you could empathize with them. You could say, I understand where you're coming from. I'm work with people in the similar situations. So by doing this, you're able to kind of pull that guard down a little bit by them understanding that you're starting to understand who they are as a person, not just as a transaction, but as a person. That's what you really want to get, that personalization feeling, to be able to get them to open up, to get them to pour everything out. So that way it's easier down the line for you to be able to get through the process. Because a lot of times we're assuming as a sales rep, this is what they need, this is what they want. But if you know from their own words what they're truly experiencing, what they truly want and need, you could use that through your sales process to go through the steps of saying, okay, this is where you're most struggling at. This is how we could move it forward. This is what we could do. So all that starts off by the initial conversation, by the initial rapport building that relationship. That's the key to it. After that, the process, the system, everything else just seems to flow so much more smoothly.
So there's something that you said, Ralph, that I want Scott to chime in on, and that's the relationship building aspect of it. And I think this, when we're talking about buyer centricity, I think there is a component of the relationship building exercise that sellers often miss. And I'm going to make the statement. I think sellers often approach the relationship build side from the perspective of what's in it for me. So I want you to kind of reframe that relationship building exercise in the right way. What should be the posture that sellers take to build the kind of relationship that Ralph is describing? What does a seller need to do to effectively do that?
Yeah. So what I would say, so yeah, relationships are, I mean, the foundation for a long-lasting business relationship. But I would say that there is a big difference between a salesperson who wants to build likability with their prospective clients. So they try to build lots of rapport and they try to be liked. And then if you put that against someone who wants to build credibility and how they can build trust based on their insight, based on their business acumen, then I think that's what people really want. And as a byproduct of that, if you have a good relationship, it will be one of trust, respect, and mutual credibility, right? So I think that's the key to a lot of buyers just want to know that they're in a very, very safe pair of hands. So, if they're dealing with a seller, they want to understand, first of all, does that seller put my interests ahead of their own? Do they know what they're talking about? Can they make me a hero in my business? Can they, serve me, my needs, and also my company needs? And, will this be a win-win relationship? So, if the seller gets all of those things in the right order, as a byproduct of that, they will also win, right? They'll earn their commission and whatever else it is. But that always has to be a byproduct of leading by trying to help and making sure that your buyer, their interests are first and foremost above anything else that you could, wish for your company or you personally.
So Scott, I want to catch or latch onto a couple of things that you mentioned. You mentioned something that stood out, and this is something that often comes up in conversation on my end, which is you want to make the buyer the hero in their story versus and look for win-win solutions. Why is that important from a mindset perspective?
So do you mean the mindset of the seller?
Yes.
Yeah, because when you have that mindset shift, it means that you take your own ego out of the equation. Your own self-interest is put to one side, and everything you drive with is in the interest of your buyer. So they will feel that you have their best interests at heart because you express concern over their problems, you empathize with their pain, and you want to lead them to a better future state. So they will have so much confidence in you as a person, and to the point that they will even forget that you are a salesperson if you do it well enough. You become that, that trusted advisor, that consultant that many people in sales talk about but don't really follow through on. And that's almost, to me, it's the sort of knowing and the doing gap. Like, you need to be that trusted advisor. Do most salespeople do it? No, they don't, because they go back to their own self-interest. So I think it's following through and just having so much integrity in what you do and knowing that that will be a bigger win-win for everyone with that mindset.
So there's something that you said there that I think I want to have Ryan tie together. And it goes back to our earlier conversation about ruthlessly disqualifying. There's an element where if you open the conversation with a new prospect and say, hey, this is what we're trying to accomplish in this conversation. And, if you've been trained on Sandler, it's called the upfront contract. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish, or what I believe we're trying to accomplish in this conversation. And at the end of the conversation, we want to determine if there's a go forward. And I'm perfectly okay with you saying there isn't a fit, because my commitment to you is that I'm trying to figure out if we can help you. not how we can help you, if we can help you. So those slight shifts that Ralph and Scott, you've mentioned, I want to tie into the whole concept of trust, and I want to tie into it this particular way. For us to be successful as sellers, for us to accomplish the things that we need to accomplish, we need to build rapport, trust, and credibility. And I would argue the most important element of that is trust. So why, and the question to you, Ryan, is how are doing these things critical to establishing trust in the buyer? Because let's be honest, sellers for the most part are almost trusted less than politicians. So let that sink in for a little bit. So we have a lot of ground to cover, and I want you to be to kind of frame that out for us from the buyer's perspective.
So one of my favorite questions to ask in interviews, and I ask this a lot, is what made you trust the sales team? It's a great question because you can see them go, oh, interesting. And as soon as I get that reaction, I know it's going to be good. And here are the top reasons. One, they understood my problems the best. And these are usually the winners, right? The people who won the deal. They understood my problems the best. I trusted them the most. They had the biggest credibility, all those things. They tell me explicitly that's what they care about. So it's so important. And you have to build that in right from the first touch point. Because you have to remember, we talked about it before, they're starting to look at solutions way before they would talk to Scott or Ralph. They might even built like their top 2 vendors before they reach out, or they might even have their choice. And you are just the sanity check against everyone else. Because if you're starting to build that credibility and that trust as early as possible, you have a higher chance of, getting the deal. But that doesn't stop at marketing. You have to carry that along, right? And the salespeople get involved too, right? So it's important because buyers tell me that's what they care about when I talk to them.
That's great stuff. So this is, I can't believe we've kind of flown through this conversation. So I want to start the close down process. And I think when we look at the broader topic, what are we trying to accomplish? We're trying to help sellers become more effective. We're trying to help sellers become more effective by coaching them on how to be more buyer-centric. So I want to hand off to Scott. And Scott, why don't you share your number one recommendation for sellers who are trying to become more buyer-centric? What's the approach that they should operationalize tomorrow? And how do they actually do that? Well, tomorrow's Saturday, but if they're selling on Saturday, that's fine. But the next opportunity. So Scott, your one critical takeaway and how do you operationalize it?
Okay, so my big takeaway for any seller is to forget about yourself and really, really listen to your buyers. Really tune into what they're saying. Forget commission, forget your job as a salesperson. Just think about a human being. And I always talk about becoming a business therapist, giving them a safe place where they can express exactly what they're feeling, what they're going through, what are their frustrations day to day, what really irritates them, and just dig into that and stop thinking about your next perfect question. Ask contextual questions inside of their answers, because that's where people really feel listened to. And it's not a trick or a hack. It's a genuine place of human interaction where you are curious and you just want to know that person. You want to understand their business, because if you can help them, then it's going to be a win-win. But you have to lead with that.
I mean, I really like you called out a couple of things, operate from a place of trying to understand, but also operate from a place of curiosity. So that's solid stuff. So you kind of cheated by offering 2 things. So shame on you, salesperson. So Scott, before I transition over to, well, actually let's do the key takeaways and then we'll do the close down. Ralph, I want to pose the same question to you.
All right.
When you're looking at helping sellers become more effective, become better from a buyer centricity perspective, what's the one thing that you would suggest to them, and how do they actually put that into practice?
Yeah, so my key takeaways and my suggested advice would be to please stop pitching product, service. My company's the best. The customers just don't care. So, and what you got to do is switch it up.
Say that louder for the people
I'm
in
going
the
to say it
back.
louder again. Please, sellers, stop pitching. Your company is the best. Your product and service is the best. The customers don't care. So, what you want to do is you want to build customer relationship, trust, rapport, everything that we're talking about today. This is mandatory in starting off a great relationship with prospects and customers. It's the only way to go about it. It's time to pivot, change the old ways of selling, show customers and prospects that you're their trusted advisor. You're there when they need you. Questions, concerns, always be available.
It's going to be really difficult to pin everybody down to one takeaway. But that's all right. So Ryan, pickleball extraordinaire, what is your key takeaway when it comes to buyer centricity and sales effectiveness? What would you recommend?
Immerse yourself in the market, because a business. I always say a business is a bet. It's a bet in a market, and if you don't understand the market that you're trying to speak to, the words they use, the problems they have, the trends that are happening, the things that are coming down the line. Like we're moving into a very unknown time next fiscal year. You have to understand these things as a salesperson, because then you won't be able to do all the things that Scott and Ralph just talked about, right? If you don't understand their world, you are going to be that person that lacks credibility, lacks trust. And I see it when one of the things I ask is like, what's the biggest sin in marketing sales? People say cold outreach. But when you ask the follow-up, I say, well, why is that? Oh, it's not relevant to me. They don't seem to get me.
So
tells you a lot right there.
Yeah, it's funny. I get this is just a quick tangent, but when you're talking about cold outreach and it not being relevant, 3 times a day I'm getting somebody from somewhere sending me a 5-paragraph LinkedIn message about PMP certification, and I'm like, how is this relevant for me? I mean, I would get it just because I'm interested and I'm a nerd, but like I'm not the persona that would be typically going for a PMP certification. Like, not relevant, blocked. So great call out there. So before we close down, Ryan, where can people find you?
LinkedIn, like probably everybody else here. Or you can just Google, type Ryan Paul Gibson to LinkedIn, I'll pop up, or just on contentlift.io. Send me DM. I'm always happy to help as best I can for anyone that has questions around this.
So feel free to send everybody a DM. Do not send them a 4-paragraph pitch on why your product is the greatest.
No.
Scott, same question to you. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so again, we all live on LinkedIn, right? It's our kind of home from home. So anyone can message me directly. I post pretty much every day. Otherwise, you can reach me on my website, which is salessquared.co.uk. And yeah, if you want to have a chat, anything related to EQ, mindset, how to sell more humanly, reach out and we can have a chat.
So you and I are going to be at a conference together in a couple of weeks as well. So share with the audience about that conference.
So that is the Sales Revolution conference in, it's actually in Germany, but it's obviously online. So I will be on a panel with 4 others, and we're talking about, similar to this conversation, how you can become very strategic in your cold outreach. So where are people going wrong? Why are people getting lost in a sea of cold outreach? Why are so many salespeople missing quota? So it will be almost a continuation of this conversation today. So looking forward to that.
It's going to be good. I'm not on the same panel as you are on the Sales Revival Conference, but my topic is going to be on the impact of AI on the sales profession. So I'm looking forward to that panel. There's a lot of great speakers there. Marcus, who's the host of the Inquisitor podcast, he's on one of the panels, so it's going to be great for those who haven't registered yet. Go ahead and register a virtual conference. It's going to be a lot of interesting speakers and topics, so that's going to be pretty cool.
And that's and also, Jim, you picked me up. It's Sales Revival Conference. I said revolution because that's been part of Leon's marketing. It's a revolution in sales, right? But
yeah. It's I don't think Leon's gonna hold it against you.
I don't think
Ralph,
so. No.
Ralph, to you, where can people find you?
Right. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Ralph Beltran, Sales Mentor. A lot of that handle, Sales Mentor. You can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, as well as Google me, and you can find all my outlets for podcasts, YouTube videos, and I talk about all things sales related. So look it up.
Yeah, keep an eye out for Ralph and Scott and Ryan and their episodes releasing on the Cascading Leadership podcast. That's going to continue some additional conversations, so that's going to be interesting as well. So I want to thank all the panelists for joining and driving this great conversation. For those who are listening or who are attending, this will actually be edited lightly and then rebroadcast next Monday. So I will be monitoring the chat, so feel free to check it out at that point. I want to thank everybody that joined. I want to thank everybody that registered. If you have questions, comments, or want to just continue the conversation, feel free to reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me through the Circa page. You can find me everywhere. I'm like omnipresent almost. So looking forward to another great conversation next week. I want to thank all the guests for their insights, and we will catch you next week with 2 other great topics.